My name is Hannah, and this is my no-buy year. There is a dog barking incessantly outside, and in about 20 minutes, Joe is going to start doing the dishes. So this video might be disrupted by all manner of noise. I'm sorry, and I hope that you can forgive me. The Norvina palette is all over YouTube right now. It's a very, very pretty object. If you are really excited about the Norvina palette, if it fills a hole in your collection, or if it's the palette you've been waiting for your whole life, or if you're an Anastasia Beverly Hills collector, or if you have some other very good reason for wanting to buy the Norvina palette, planning to buy the Norvina palette, or for having already bought the Norvina palette, I'm not here to kill your vibe. I'm not here to touch your weave. I'm just here to dupe the vibes of the Norvina palette for myself and for any of you out there who might be on a no-buy or a low-buy, or looking to be talked down from the excitement over this palette and the impulse to buy this palette for any number of reasons. Duping the vibes just has to do with taking a good hard look at the palette and thinking about the way that your eyes would look if you had the palette, and then seeing if you can create that kind of look using the shadows that are already in your collection. The idea is that the vibes of a look, vibes in this case meaning essentially the overall color story and the color combinations in a look, the vibes of a look are what define the look, that they're much more important than the individual shadows that you've used. I find that deliberately duping the vibes of a palette can help to calm down the preciousness and acquisitiveness that an exciting new release often generates inside of me. And I have a specific process for duping the vibes. I look at a picture of the palette and I imagine myself using the palette. I go through shade by shade. I imagine which shade in the palette I would reach for, and then I find something in my collection that works just as well. And at the end of the process, I have an eye look that is very, very evocative of the new release in question, but I've created the whole thing using the collection that I already had. As you obviously know, this is my no-buy year, so I'm not buying the Norvina palette, I'm not buying any new shadows, I'm not buying any singles that I might want to buy to satisfy the urges for the pops of color in that palette. I only have my own collection to work with. And still, I think I was able to dupe the vibes pretty well. So when I first took a look at the pictures of this palette, I was really drawn to that shimmery orchid shade, that super, super brilliant orchid. It's the one called Celestial. And I thought if I had this palette and I was sitting down with it for the first time and I wanted to create an exciting look, I would definitely create a look that centered on that shade. And I thought that I would probably go in for a deep transition shade to create smokiness and drama, and I would probably be reaching into the matte shade in the bottom right-hand corner, that shade called Passion. So I looked in my collection and I found something that looks to me almost exactly like it. And this is a little single shadow, and it's something that I depotted from a ColourPop palette. I'm not sure which one it was. I acquired a bunch of little ColourPop palettes and depotted them along the way back in 2017. It could have been You Had Me at Hello. I will try to find out and put it in the description bar below, but honestly, it doesn't matter that much because if you are duping the vibes of this palette, you're looking in your collection. You're not looking to purchase something. You're looking to see what's the next best thing, what's the closest thing, what do you have that will work. So this is what I had that will work. It's an unmarked, depotted little shadow, and this is what I have all up in my crease. And really, I used a lot of it and I brought it almost all the way up to my brows to lay down a warm, plummy base for this orchid look. It looks a bit dark in this swatch, but buffed out over my lid, I feel like it's definitely serving the exact same purpose that Passion from the Norvina palette would serve. So after I had really shaped and deepened up the sockets of my hooded eyes using that shade, I looked back at the picture of the palette and I thought, you know what I would do at this moment? I would go directly in with Celestial, that shimmery orchid shade, right onto my lid, all over my lid, and I would be packing it on with my finger and trying to build it up as intensely as possible. Now, at this moment, I thought that I was stymied. I thought, I'm not going to be able to do a duping the vibes video because I don't have anything remotely like that. I don't have a shimmery orchid shade in my collection. That was what I thought. But I decided to look anyway. I think we often don't really know what's in our collection, especially if you have more than just a handful of eyeshadow palettes. You might be able to envision the general je ne sais quoi of each palette, but a lot of times we don't have a good handle on how every single shadow performs. So I started looking around and swatching around, and lo and behold, here is what I found. My tried and true electric palette, this turns out to be such a good resource for duping the vibes of palettes that have pops of color in them. This shadow, Jilted, it doesn't look in the pan anything like Celestial looks in the pictures of the Norvina palette, but when it's swatched, that is nothing if not a brilliant orchid. And you can see that it performs gorgeously. It's all over my lids. And it's not glittery. It's not a glittery metallic shade the way that Celestial perhaps promises to be. I'm not quite sure. Looking at some online swatches, it appears that Jilted might be a bit more saturated, a bit richer in its color than Celestial from the Norvina palette, but it is everything that I envisioned I would have on my eyes if I had my hands on this new palette from ABH. I almost never reach for my electric palette in the day-to-day, and I almost never reach for this eyeshadow, so it was really exciting to go ham with it all over my lids. And I'll tell you what I did. I packed it on with my fingers, and I got pretty decent buildup of it. But then I actually went back with a tiny bit of glitter glue on the center of my lids, and then I packed even more shadow on top of that to get as intense a color as I could. I'm pretty happy with it. So after I had that beautiful color beaming from my eyelids, I looked back at the picture of the Norvina palette and I thought, what would I go in with to brighten up the inner corner of my eye, to blend into that rich orchid color and just give me some illumination and some shaping on my lid. And the one that leapt out at me is the shade called Dreamer. It's in the upper left-hand corner of the palette, and it is a beautiful peachy champagne metallic. I have a beautiful peachy champagne metallic. In fact, I'll wager that I have quite a few, but the one that I've been reaching for the most frequently lately is another random depotted ColourPop single that's living in my Z palette. This is it right here. I'm not sure which palette it's from, and I don't really care. All I know is that it's unbelievably gorgeous, like so many champagne-y, peachy metallic shades that we all have in our collections. It's perfect. It's stunning. I used a tiny brush. I packed it into the top part of my inner corner, the inner corner of my eyelids, essentially, and then I dragged it out and blended it into that orchid shade. It's perfect, and from what I can tell by looking at swatches online, it's a pretty spot-on match for the ABH shade Dreamer from the Norvina palette. I've mentioned this recently, but I have the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. It's the only ABH palette that I own, and it has two shimmery shades in it, Vermeer and Primavera. And when I shopped my stash for this a couple of months ago, I found myself increasingly disappointed with the performance of those shadows. They do swatch pretty well. I'm not sure if you can see them from there, but I know from recent experience that I much prefer working with my ColourPop metallics. So that makes me feel like even if I had the Norvina palette, I might be reaching for this little bean instead of Dreamer. So I looked back into the palette and I thought, what would I reach for next? What would I want next from this palette for my eye look? And curiously, the thing that I kind of thought that I would want next, which is a pretty dark matte shade to pop in my outer V, I don't see in the palette. I don't see the thing that I want. And it might be that volatile, the taupey brown, is darker than it looks in this picture that I'm using. That might be something I could use to deepen up the outer V. It also might be that passion is a little bit darker than it looks in these pictures. But honestly, the shade in the palette that I'm the most drawn to for use in the outer V is the one called Drama. It's in the upper right-hand corner. It's a deep Merlot color that I really, really love using in my outer V, but it's a shimmer. I don't think I have a shimmer that's exactly that color, but I do have a matte that's very, very close. And when it comes to duping the vibes, the color story, it is the colors that really dominate this project. It's the colors that really matter. On top of which, a matte is what I would prefer to use in my outer V. So I actually prefer this when it comes to continuing on with the eye look that I had started building based on this palette. This is another random ColourPop single. It's a deep reddish brown, and I just popped a little bit of it in the outer corner and blended it for a slightly smokier look. To define my lower lash line, I looked at the palette and I thought that I would probably go back into Passion, the shade that I buffed out above my crease. So I went back into the shade I had used in lieu of that shade, and I did some work on my lower lash line. Then after that, I got a little bit creative. When I initially sat down to create this look, I basically scoured my collection and collected all of the purples. This is being advertised as a purple palette. It strikes one as a purple palette, even though there are only really 2 purples in it. It's built around the idea of purple, the feeling of purple, different shades of purple. So I tried to make a brief mental catalog of everything purple that I have, and one of my favorite purple eyeshadows is this one. I have to be careful holding up this palette because Galaxy down here in the corner is pretty shattered and I don't want any of the little pieces to fall out. But Magnetic is the shade of which I speak. It's this purple shadow right here. This is the Urban Decay Moon Dust palette for those of you who aren't familiar. And here's the eyeshadow. It is so pretty. It is so pretty, and it's purple. So this is a glittery, smoky shadow with a bit of iridescence. It is not a dupe for any of the shadows in the Norvina palette, but I did feel like I could use it to enhance the Norvina palette vibes of my eye look today. So I buffed out a good bit of it on my lower lash line, and I also tapped some of it into my outer V and then kind of up onto the outer third of my lid. So that created a bit of a glimmery and slightly more ethereal overlay to my existing eye look. And it also darkened up the outer third of my eye with a bit more of a violet shift. And that is something that you see in this palette. It's the feeling you get from this palette. It's the color of the cover of the palette. So it's very much in line with the vibes of this palette to me, even though at first glance, this eyeshadow doesn't look like one that is actually in this palette, but it looks like one that could be in this palette. Now there is one eyeshadow in this palette that's very compelling. That's one of the stars of the show. And when I first saw it, I thought, ugh, I don't have anything remotely like that in my collection. I don't even have anything that has its vibes. And that is the shadow Soul. It's the lavender. I became aware a couple of months into my no-buy year that I don't have any rich pastel purples. Not a one. I was watching Kat from Beauty News one day and she had this unbelievably beautiful pastel purple eye look on. I think she had used the My Little Pony palette from ColourPop, and I thought, ooh, I want to create that look or something like it. So I went scouring my collection and I was left bereft. I just don't have anything like that. So I thought that that was going to be the one shadow that would just have to be omitted completely from this vibe duping project. But after I had finished this eye look, I went to highlight my face and I reached for the Anastasia Beverly Hills Moonchild palette. I thought, why not continue on with the dreamy, ethereal purple vibes for the rest of my look? And when I opened this palette, what did I see but pastel purples? Purple Horseshoe. This highlighter is the reason that I bought this palette. I wanted an iridescent pastel purple highlighter so bad. It is so pretty. Joe started doing the dishes at this point. You'll be hearing a lot of banging and clanging and water in the background. The dishes just have to get done, you guys. I don't know what to tell you. Obviously, it has a different texture and a different finish from Soul, which is the violet shadow in the Norvina palette. But I felt that when I popped it on my inner corner, along with the rest of this look, it brought the overall color story one step closer to the color story that one might expect for a dramatic eye look created with the Norvina palette. That is it. That is how I duped the vibes of this palette. It went a long way towards satisfying my own curiosity about what kind of look I might create with this palette if I had it my first time out the gate. Because this is the look that I would create with this palette if I had it. This is what I would do, and I was able to do it using the eyeshadows already in my collection. And honestly, if I cover up Celestial and Soul, those pops of color, those compelling and more original shades that appear in this palette, it's just a neutral palette. Everything else in the palette is something that I have a bunch of times over in my collection, that I'm very familiar with, that I'm already very happy with. I don't need more shadows like that. So if you are in the situation where you want to buy the Norvina palette, but you don't want to buy it, if you want to talk yourself out of it, maybe sit down and try duping the vibes. Try looking at a picture of the palette and imagining the eye look that you would create, and see if you can create something pretty similar using shadows that you already own. And remember, it doesn't have to be spot on. It's not about duping the palette. It's about duping the vibes. And it's about figuring out that even though color and finish and texture and even performance will vary slightly from brand to brand and from palette to palette, what really matters to the effect of an overall eye look is the color story, the way you put colors together. And it may be that the shadows that you already have in your collection will go quite a long way towards creating the eye looks that you would be wearing if you owned the Norvina palette. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it was helpful. And I hope you'll remember to take extra good care of yourself this week so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.